Live with CDP Sports Talk, a weekly sports and entertainment podcast sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet. Live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And on audio via Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Radio Public, and TuneIn. Now, here's your host, Chris Palme.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 50, overall 325 of Live with CDP Sports Talk, sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210, or email them at info@barrycullen.com. As always, Live with CDP Sports Talk is on weeknights on radio station WQEE 99.1 FM in Metro Atlanta, the home of Southern Talk and Sports. And I want to say thank you to Ryan O'Neill for having me on the station for the last 8 months. And I'm looking forward to my show today. This guest is his first time on my show, and he is a co-author of a new book called The Buffalo Braves. I almost said Bandits. Buffalo Braves from A to Z, about the Buffalo Braves 7 years in Buffalo in the 70s. And his name is Greg Tranter. I hope I didn't butcher his name wrong. He's a prominent sports historian, curator, and author with a specialized expertise in Buffalo sports history. And he's also authored 5 books on Buffalo sports history as well. And we're going to bring on Greg today.
Hey, Chris.
Good afternoon, Greg. How are you? Good. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on the show.
So, where are you out of, Greg? Are you in the Boston area?
Yes, actually in a town called Hopkinton, which is about 30 miles outside of Boston. It's actually known as the start of the Boston Marathon.
Awesome. I take it they're not too happy about their New England Patriots right now, just briefly.
No, and I'm enjoying the moment.
1-5. Also, I was reading up on you too, Greg, that you've been a Buffalo Bills season ticket holder for 38 years. And what's that been like? And just quick thoughts on the win against the Giants Sunday night.
Yeah. No, I'm a diehard Bills fan. I've been a fan since I was 8 years old. Went to all 4 Super Bowls, have a huge Buffalo Bills memorabilia collection. So they are my team and have been for a long, long time. And I've been a season ticket holder, as you mentioned, for 38 years. And, the win Sunday night was one of those old school, fight 'em out contests, 14-9. The Bills certainly didn't play at their best. And I think the Giants did play at their best with, Brian Daboll knows Josh pretty well and defends him quite well. But good teams win games that they don't play real well, and the Bills pulled it out, which was the most important thing.
Well, yes, and I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and we ended up losing to the Jets 20-14. And I'll tell you this, the New York Jets, even without Aaron Rodgers, are not the same old Jets. They have a very good defense. They're well coached, and they've beaten now Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, and they went into Denver and won, which is never easy to win either.
Right. No, right. Their defense is very, very good for sure.
Absolutely. But I brought you on today to talk about your new book, and I see you got your Buffalo Braves T-shirt on, the orange and black, similar colors to the Bandits.
Right. They wore these for a few years, and then they went to the baby blues that a lot of people remember them for.
How did you end up meeting Bud Bailey, who helped or co-authored this book? And how did this come about with writing the book, The Buffalo Braves from A to Z?
Yeah, so Bud and I have been good friends for about 8 years. We actually met at the Buffalo History Museum a number of years ago at a sports event. And he introduced himself to me. And of course, we have a tremendous amount in common, being both longtime, Buffalo sports fans. And of course, he's been a longtime Buffalo sports reporter. But this book came about really kind of interesting during the pandemic. both Bud and I are members of the Pro Football Researchers Association. And so during the pandemic, we started writing bios of Buffalo Bills players from the 1960s. And the PFRA had a project going, and still does, about writing biographies about NFL players. So we did that for quite a while. And then we said, we should, why don't we do all the Braves players? Because it's a finite number. There's 71 Braves players. So we started writing their bios, and we did all 71. And then we decided let's do all the front office people. So we did the owners, the general managers, the coaches. And then we said, this is book worthy. So we started shopping for a publisher, and we approached St. Johann Press, and they were very excited about it, jumped right in. But they also said, well, you got to do more than bios. So let's do a review of, all the years that they played. Let's do a review of the places they played. And so it turned into a total history book of the Braves. And it's by far the most comprehensive book ever put out by, about the team.
I was reading a little bit of tidbits about Van Miller, and also I did remember as a kid that the Braves did play in Toronto a number of games at Maple Leaf Gardens as well, which kind of gave Toronto a taste of the NBA. Toronto actually originally had an ABA team long before the Braves and the Raptors, called the Toronto Huskies. So there was basketball at Maple Leaf Gardens back in, I believe, the 40s.
Yes. There was actually.
Yeah, and I was go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, but Buffalo actually had a NBA. It was in the National Basketball League in 1946, which was a precursor to the NBA. And today that franchise is the Atlanta Hawks.
Did not know that. Wow.
Yeah.
I knew the Hawks came from St. Louis. Atlanta got their team from St. Louis. So did the Buffalo team move to St. Louis then?
Well, so they started out as the Buffalo Bisons. They played 13 games in Buffalo in 1946, and then they moved to the Tri-Cities.
Okay.
And then from the Tri-Cities, they moved from there to St. Louis. Actually, to Milwaukee, I think, and then to St. Louis.
And I was going to say, there was a lot of teams that were in the NBA before I was born, like obviously Buffalo in the 70s, Cincinnati, and a number of other teams as well.
Well, the interesting part is you go all the way back to the 40s and early 50s. Western New York had three teams. Rochester had a team called the Royals, and Syracuse had a team called the Nationals. And in fact, Rochester, who became Cincinnati, Rochester actually won an NBA championship.
Wow. And then Cincinnati ended up going to what, Sacramento?
Yeah, Cincinnati is Sacramento, and Syracuse is the Philadelphia 76ers.
Wow. And the Golden State Warriors were originally the Philadelphia Warriors.
Right.
Yeah. So I just love the history of sports. And I just, like I said, I enjoyed reading your book about it today. And how long of a process did it take you and Bud to get the book finally finished and ready to publish?
It was about 2 years, because if you start with just doing the biographies before we really dreamt about it as a book, we really focused on those. And those took about 6 months to do all 71 players. And then once we started thinking about it as a book, then it was probably another 18 months from the time we were actually doing the work to it publishing, which it's now, it's publishing like this week or next week. And so yeah, it's about 2 years in total, but about 18 months once we decided, okay, let's make a book out of this.
How difficult was it to locate these 71 players? Or I imagine there might be some that are deceased.
Yeah, no, several that are deceased. One of the things that's very helpful nowadays is you don't necessarily have to go to libraries to get information. So Bud and I are both subscribers to newspapers.com, which gives you newspapers from all over the country. Like the Buffalo News is online. And so we were able to get a tremendous amount of information just researching online. We also went back to many of their colleges because, of course, most of these players had tremendous college careers. They're likely in their school's Hall of Fames. So there's a reasonable amount of information at each of the universities that most of these players played at. And then in some cases, we were able to reach out to the players and actually talk to them.
Yeah, one of them I know very well from the bad boy area, bad boys era with the Detroit Pistons, and he just got traded before they won back-to-back in 89-90 with Adrian Dantley.
Yes, Dantley actually is one of my favorite players of all time because I'm a University of Notre Dame fan. And of course, he played at Notre Dame and was a superstar there. And then, of course, the Braves drafted him. He was the 6th pick in the draft and came to Buffalo and then was Rookie of the Year. And in fact, he holds an interesting statistic. He's the only Rookie of the Year ever traded after his rookie season in NBA
Really?
history.
Wow,
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So he only played 1 year for Buffalo and then they traded him, which is when the franchise started going downhill, when they were basically trading away all their best players.
Now, as for the management part, is there still some living people left that were part of the management team of the Buffalo Braves?
Oh yeah, the Braves' original owner. Technically you can't call him the original owner, but Paul Snyder, who bought the team from the NBA. There's kind of an interesting background here because, like, if you think about Buffalo sports, Buffalo, the city and the community, was trying to get a NHL franchise for a number of years. They were never really trying to get an NBA franchise. However, a New York investment banking firm applied for a franchise and got one. But they didn't have the wherewithal or the money to run it. So 3 months after they're given the franchise, the NBA basically takes the franchise back and owns it and is looking for a local owner in Buffalo. And so they heard about Paul Snyder because Paul Snyder owned a company that he had just sold. His company was called Freezer Queen. Well, they were the founder and inventor of the TV dinner. And so he sold the company for $22 million back in 1970. So the NBA had heard about him and said, hey, this guy's got a lot of money. We should reach out and see if he'll buy the team. So they encouraged Paul to go to a preseason game that was played in Niagara Falls. And so he took his 10-year-old son with him. Well, it just happens to be that the Braves won that game on a last-second shot in overtime. His son turns to him and says, Dad, you should buy the team. So he did. And so his first game as an owner was their opening game of the regular season. And Paul is still alive. And we interviewed him. And he had some really cool stories to tell about the team. And he feels the representation of his ownership has been misrepresented. That, he didn't try to get rid of the team. And he will acknowledge and admit that he wished he knew more about the NBA and what the NBA could become than what he knew back in the mid-70s. Because he thought, he thinks in retrospect that was the worst decision he made and that Buffalo could have really been an NBA market.
What would have happened if the Braves had lost that game that he went with his son? Would that have made a decision of him buying the team in that? And
no, I don't think so. He kind of jokes about it. I think he was inclined to buy the team anyway.
Anyways, okay.
But just kind of funny how he tells the story.
And I believe, Paul, didn't he run Darien Lake at some point for many years?
Yes, he owned Darien Lake for a number of years too. Yes, that's true. Yep.
Wow. Well, like I said, and then, we'll get into some questions, Paul. My show is in Guelph, Ontario, which is an hour from Toronto, a couple hours from Buffalo, not that far. But can you tell my audience just a little bit about yourself and when you started getting into sports and who were some of your influences as professional athletes back then?
Oh, sure. So I grew up actually in the Corning, Elmira area, which is about 2 hours southeast of Buffalo. My dad took me to my first Bills game when I was 8. I fell in love with it, became a fan. I also loved their standing buffalo helmet at the time. And so between the helmet and going to the game and loving Jack Kemp and all those guys, and they won championships when I was 8 and 9 years old, I became a huge Bills fan that then ultimately turned into a Buffalo sports fan, because they were also the closest city that had major league sports. Otherwise, it was either New York City or Toronto. And back then, Toronto only had the Maple Leafs. They didn't have basketball and baseball and all that stuff. So I was a Knicks fan as a kid before the Braves were born. And of course, in 1970, the Knicks win the NBA championship with Willis Reed and Clyde Frazier and all that. Well, I was in 8th grade at the time. Well, that fall is when the Braves are born. So I'm living in Elmira at the time. The town next to us is Horseheads. The Braves have a preseason game in Horseheads against the Boston Celtics. It's the 6th preseason game in the history of the franchise. My dad takes my brother and I to the game. And of course, this is the Celtics with John Havlicek, Dave Cowens, JoJo White. They had won 11 championships up to this point. So, I mean, they were the team to watch, right? And then here's the Braves. Well, the Braves have 3 former Knicks players, Nate Bowman, Don May, and Bill Hoskett, all reserves on the Knicks championship team. Well, I like the Knicks, so I like those 3 guys. Well, Don May turns out to be the leading scorer of the team, both in that game in Horseheads, but also for the whole season. Well, that game, the Braves won 130-88.
Wow.
It's the largest margin of victory of any game in the history of the franchise. And so I fell in love with it. And, they played in a junior high gym.
Wow.
It was packed with 2,100 people, but you were right. I mean, the players were so close to you that it was just a fabulous experience. And I instantly became a Braves fan at that point.
And the league was much different back then than it became until 1980. The rival, I think the league changed a lot. The NBA when Bird and Magic came in, and I think that just kind of took the league to another level in 1980 going up forward.
Well, and that's the huge missed opportunity here, and Paul Snyder will tell you the same thing. One of the issues that Paul said that ultimately ran the team out of Buffalo is the NBA told them that they had to have weekend play games, Saturday games, game dates. And the Little Three, which was Niagara, Canisius, and St. Bonaventure, was huge in basketball in the mid-70s. Canisius had the rights to Saturday game dates at Memorial Auditorium. Paul Snyder said he offered the priest there a whole lot of money to be able to get dates. And the priest said, no, I can't do that. If I let you do that, it will ruin Little Three basketball. And he's there, I can't let that happen. So he refused to give Paul Saturday dates. Well, if you know college basketball history, this is 1977-78. 2 years later in 1980, the Big East is formed in college basketball. None of those 3 teams get in. Well, college basketball in Western New York goes downhill. They're not drawing huge crowds at Memorial Auditorium anymore because the Big East is Eastern basketball at that point. And as you said, Magic and Bird come out in 79-80. So if the Braves had held on for 2 or 3 more years, we might still have them as a team. But those 2 things kind of came together, and Snyder said we didn't see that kind of opportunity until Magic and Bird came.
Wow. And like I said, I just, growing up as a kid here in the Toronto area, I knew about the Sabres and Bills, but I didn't remember a lot of marketing for the Braves. Was that an issue too, promoting the Braves back then?
Yeah. I don't think they were, well marketed near as much as the Sabres were. And the sad part of that is if you actually look at the Braves teams of 73, 74, and 75 with Bob McAdoo, Ernie DiGregorio, Jim McMillan, they basically played a brand of basketball that is played today. They were the forerunner to the run and shoot. Everybody's shooting from the outside. You know, there weren't 3-point baskets then, but Bob McAdoo was the first big man to consistently shoot from the outside. If you think of like Kevin Durant today, that was Bob McAdoo. But nobody 6'11" shot 20-foot jumpers back in those days. So they were pretty much a precursor to the way that basketball is played today. And they were really exciting to watch. And, you know, McAdoo led the league in scoring 3 years in a row. Ernie DiGregorio was a great passer, and he led the league in assists. He was Rookie of the Year his first season. They were really fun to watch.
Well, I was reading also too, Greg, would it have made a difference with the Braves if they had drafted Calvin Murphy, who was at Niagara University, or Nate Archibald? How hard was that?
Oh, I mean, the Murphy one is like huge because they end up drafting John Hummer, who, you know, was sure he was a Princeton guy, but I mean, you know, he was a mediocre NBA player. But you know, there was a lot of question back then whether a 5'10" player could be a good pro basketball player. Well, of course, Calvin Murphy proved everybody wrong, right? That he could be, and he was a great player. Oh my gosh, yeah, you put Murphy on that team with McAdoo and Ernie D, because then Ernie D was the passer. So I mean, he wouldn't have needed to score many points. Then you got Randy Smith and you got Jim McMillan, and I mean, who knows? But yeah, that was a huge missed opportunity, and a missed opportunity from an attendance point of view too, because of course he had a huge fan base in Western New York.
I'm going to say this, Greg. I'm not sure you're going to agree with it or not, but I see some similarities between the Buffalo Braves demise and the Vancouver Grizzlies demise.
Yeah, sure. I could see how you could make that, you know, kind of correlation. You know, it's so much of it is, you know, a few bad decisions, a couple missed opportunities. And, you know, I mean, in reality, could the Braves exist today? I don't know that Buffalo could support 3 major league teams with the economics of, you know, sports today. You know, it would be really hard, I think, for the Braves to compete if they were in Buffalo today.
How much of an impact did the Braves have on the NBA coming to Toronto in 1995? Do you think there was a little bit of an impact?
Maybe. I suspect more it was, you know, Toronto's a huge market. It's a quote international market, right? They get out of the United States. I think it was probably more what are the pros of Toronto than did Buffalo really have an impact, other than they know Buffalo's a good sports town. And so, but, you know, people from Buffalo will make the trek up to see a game up there. But I doubt it had a significant impact.
When Paul Schneider had some of the games go to Toronto, did that alienate some of the fan base and media in Buffalo at the time back in the 70s?
No, you know, funny, not near as much as when the Bills moved games to Toronto.
Okay, yes.
Right. I mean, there was a huge backlash of fans in Buffalo. Of course, I think a lot of fans in Buffalo thought that was the first step to the team moving to Toronto. Right. But no, I don't think there was a huge blowback because it wasn't a significant number of games. And of course, if you think about the NBA, they play, 41 home games. So if you move 4 or 5 to Toronto, we still have 35, 36 games. In fact, what I'd really like to see is I'd like to see the Raptors play a few games in Buffalo. Like, why don't they play like 2 home games a year in Buffalo? I think that would be really cool. In fact, there was a couple years ago, the LA Clippers had a throwback jersey night, and they played in LA. It was like, why didn't you play Toronto in Buffalo? If you're doing a throwback jersey night of the Braves, it's like, play the game in Buffalo. But the NBA doesn't listen to me.
That's actually a very good suggestion. I know the Raptors are Canada's team, but I don't know why they haven't ever played a preseason game at the KeyBank Center. I keep calling it the Marine Midland Center, but the KeyBank Center, and that arena probably would be a decent facility for an NBA preseason game.
Oh yeah, and if you played the Clippers and you did a throwback jersey night, you would sell thousands of jerseys. You know.
Absolutely. And also, you'll have fans come from Southern Ontario. It's not that long of a trip from Buffalo to Toronto, and that. So I actually think that's a great idea.
Well, and I think you would get more Buffalo fans interested in the Raptors, right? And maybe go to a few Raptors games a year, and stuff like that. So I just think it's a missed opportunity.
I was going to ask you about that. Obviously, in Toronto, the Blue Jays and the Buffalo Bisons, Toronto has a connection with the Bills, even they don't play in Toronto anymore. But you're right. When I go to Buffalo and that, there doesn't seem to be any connection with the Raptors like there are with the Blue Jays or even the Maple Leafs.
Right. I mean, and yeah, I mean, and if you've been down for a Maple Leafs game down here, I mean, it's like half the arena is Toronto fans.
All right. The next question I wanted to ask you, Greg, is I'm going to reword this question. How did it come about the NBA selecting Buffalo as an NBA franchise in 1970? And were people in the city kind of shocked that they got selected then?
Yeah. As I said, it was an investment banking group that actually applied for the franchise called Neuberger, Loeb and Company. And they applied for the franchise. There was also 3 other cities that had applied at the same time that ultimately got selected. 4 teams got selected, but they only admitted 3, with Buffalo being one of them. And yeah, I think it was somewhat of a surprise. And there hadn't been a lot of pre-planning. That's where the Sabres got a jump start, because the Sabres had been, as I mentioned, that they had been trying to get a franchise for a while. Well, they had all these arrangements worked out with the city, with Memorial Auditorium. So they had all these preferred rights to the arena that the basketball team never had. In fact, when you went to a Braves game, they shared revenue with the Sabres on concessions, which drove Paul Snyder crazy. But that's what the Sabres had negotiated before the Braves were granted a franchise. And so, yeah, I think the Braves were at a disadvantage from the outset. And yet they still did pretty well. And, they drew 12,000 fans a game in 1974-75 when they were good. And when they had an exciting team. And, I think they could have kept that up, but they were definitely at a disadvantage.
What year I forgot what year they raised the roof on the odd and added the orange sheets and increased the capacity? Was it 72, 73?
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to exactly remember, but I think it was their second season. So it would have been 71, 72, where they raised the roof. And that was a contingency for both the Sabres and the Braves to get franchises, where they had to have an arena with at least 15,000 seats. And so they had to raise the roof and add the upper tier of seats.
Was there ever any talk of the owners of the Sabres, obviously the Knox family, taking the Braves and having 2 franchises into one back then?
No, I don't think so. And I don't know that the Knoxes had the financial wherewithal to run two franchises at that point.
Okay, I wanted to ask you that. And this is another question I wanted to ask. How did the name of the team came about and the original colors?
So it was they did a name the team contest. And they got, I don't know, like 13,000 responses, and decided on the Braves, which was really kind of interesting because, you don't think of Buffalo as, almost all their teams up to that point were called the Bisons. And then there was the Bills. And of course the Sabres was kind of an offshoot. But yeah, it was a name the team contest. And they chose the Braves. And then, as I mentioned, they started out with orange and black, and they wore those the first few seasons. and then they went to powder blue, and I think it was 73. They went to the kind of baby blue colors.
What color did you prefer better, the orange and black or the powder blues or both?
Oh, I love the baby blues. Yeah, no, I love that. And you see on the cover of the book is actually the white jerseys that McAdoo's wearing, and the back cover is the blue ones.
What was the runner-up name to the Braves?
Oh, I don't even know if I remember.
Okay,
It might have been the Buffalo Nickels.
okay. I always curious because I know the Blue Jays back in the 70s had a whole bunch of names besides the Blue Jays, and they went with them. But the Blue Jays were actually very close to being called the Toronto Giants in 76.
Oh, that's interesting.
They had a deal with this, the owner of the Giants back then, and the mayor of San Francisco put in a legal injunction, and they stopped them from moving to Toronto, but they had merchandise, Toronto Giants hats, shirts, and letterheads and everything, and they had everything ready for them to go. So it's just amazing how things in back then changed now.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. That's interesting.
And it worked out well for the Giants, obviously, in San Francisco, and the Toronto Blue Jays have done well since they've been here 47 years now.
Oh yeah, geez, that's hard to believe because I went to games their first season. So holy cow, it's 47 years. That's hard to believe.
Where's the time go?
I know, right?
Yes, absolutely. Are you still good for time, Greg, for a few more questions?
Okay. Oh, sure.
Wanted to ask you this one as well. What were your thoughts on the Buffalo Braves GM Eddie Donovan, and how much? I guess we've already answered that question on how much work about getting an expansion team. But what were your thoughts on general manager Eddie Donovan and his time in Buffalo?
Well, of course, Donovan came from the Knicks, right? And so he built the championship team in New York, and then came to Buffalo. And if it's a little bit hard to say how much of the building of the franchise was Donovan versus Jack Ramsey, because you could sit there and say Donovan did a good job with the expansion draft. But other than Bob Kaufman, none of those guys were with the team by the time they were good. And was Elmore Smith a really good draft pick? You can argue whether he was or not. But when Ramsey came, they really did a great job building the team. Drafting McAdoo, drafting Ernie D, but they made great trades to get, Jim McMillan, Garfield Hurd. Of course, they made an unbelievable draft choice, a 7th round pick to get Randy Smith. How much of that was Donovan versus Ramsey? I suspect it was the two of them working together well, and Ramsey knowing the style of basketball he wanted to play. So yeah, I think Donovan was good, and it just happened to be when he left and went back to New York, the team went downhill shortly after that. Now, a lot of that was ownership. But no, I think Eddie Donovan was an excellent general manager. And interesting, they had a big name coach too to start. Dolph Schayes, was a great NBA player. And I think, and he's from Syracuse. So I think they hired him because he had an upstate New York presence and he was well known. But Paul Snyder said years later, he was a quote, terrible coach. And he only lasted 1 year, and the opening game of the second season, they lost by 40 some points on opening, or 33 points on opening night. And Snyder was so mad he fired him the first game of the season.
Wow. Okay, we've already talked about Paul Schneider. What were your thoughts on John Y. Brown, who took the team over and then ended up flipping it with the Celtics, taking the Celtics, and then the Braves moving to San Diego, I believe, in 78?
Yeah, I mean, John Y. Brown is the reason we don't have a team today. It's not Paul Snyder. I mean, yeah, Paul Snyder sold him the team. But the reason that we don't have a team is John Y. Brown. And when Brown came to Buffalo, even though he said, oh, this is a good market and all that, that was all for the newspapers. He actually wanted to move the team to Kentucky because if you remember, he owned the Kentucky Colonels of the American Basketball Association. And he decided not to pay the money because I think it was $3.5 million to pay his way in when the ABA and NBA merged. He decided not to pay that and let the Colonels go out of business. Well, he buys the Braves a few months later for less money than he would have had to pay to get the Colonels into the NBA. And so I think he wanted to move the team to Kentucky, but that never worked out because they just didn't have an arena big enough and they couldn't get, I don't know what all the reasons were, but it didn't work out. But he basically came here and started dismantling the team because he really couldn't afford it. So, he sells Bob McAdoo. I mean, he traded Bob McAdoo for John Gianelli and $3 million. He traded Jim McMillan for money and draft picks. So he basically, tore the team apart with the idea at the end of the day, they had a lease agreement with the city of Buffalo for Memorial Auditorium that if season tickets fell below 4,500, he could get out of the lease. Well, what happens, the first year he's the full owner, they go 30-52 and season tickets fall below 4,500 and then he can opt out of the lease, of which he ultimately does. So to me, he's the bad guy, not Paul Snyder.
Sounds sort of like Carroll Ballard was when he owned the Maple Leafs. Was there any chance of them moving the team to Toronto in the 70s?
No, I don't think the NBA was that open-minded then to think of Toronto as a city that they could have a team. And you briefly mentioned it. I mean, the end of the team is really quite interesting and quite amazing. Because the NBA had a dilemma. Irv Levin owned the Boston Celtics. Irv was originally from San Diego. So he went to the commissioner and basically said, I'm going to move the Celtics to San Diego. And Larry O'Brien, who was the commissioner at the time, said, you can't do that. Like, Boston is the NBA, right?
Yeah.
And so, and at the same time, John Y. Brown was looking for, Kentucky didn't work. Then they considered Dallas and they considered some other places, and he wasn't finding a place to move the Braves, to the point where the Braves might have had to play the following season without a lease agreement with Memorial Auditorium. Can you imagine how many Buffalo fans would have come to the games, knowing that the team's going to leave at some point as soon as he can find a place? So Larry O'Brien steps in with the bright idea of them trading franchises. It's like, well, okay, Irv, you take the Braves franchise and move it to San Diego, and John Y. Brown becomes the owner of the Celtics. So really, if you look at it, the Braves are the Boston Celtics, and the Celtics are the San Diego and now LA Clippers. Even though the NBA looks at it as, no, the Braves moved. Well, no, the franchises were traded. So Buffalo ended up in Boston, and Boston moved to San Diego. And, oh, by the way, as part of that, there were players that went both directions. Half of basically, the math's not 100%, but basically half the Braves players went to Boston and the other half went to San Diego. And Irv Levin had the opportunity to select Larry Bird, and he didn't. He took Freeman Williams instead, and Larry Bird ended up with the Celtics. Imagine if Larry Bird ended up in San Diego.
They still might have had a team today.
Right. Right.
That's another market I wanted to ask you about, since I have you on, Greg. Any chance San Diego will ever get not just an NFL team, but an NBA team again as well?
Boy, you would think so. I mean, it's a pretty big city. It's a great place to go. It's got beautiful weather. I'm really annoyed the NFL doesn't have a team there, because the NFL should absolutely be in San Diego, but they couldn't get a new stadium built. So I understand the economics. But it's, they're one of the larger cities in the country without a major league franchise in either of those two major sports.
All right. This one I wanted to ask you about as well, Greg. What was the media coverage like for the Buffalo Braves in Buffalo and Western New York? And was there any kind of marketing of the team in Southern Ontario and outside of Buffalo?
Well, interesting. So you go back to that. those days, and there wasn't like large television contracts. Like the Braves didn't have a local TV station that carried all their games. I think there were like 15 games that were on local TV, and that was it. If you followed the Braves, if you didn't go to the games in person, you listened to Van Miller on the radio. That was how you heard the games, because there wasn't a ton of games on television. I mean, remember, what was it? Wasn't it in the late 70s that their championship games were on tape delay?
I believe until like 1982 or 83, I believe.
Right. I mean, that's like amazing, isn't it? When you think of today, like every NBA game you want to watch is on television, right? And back then that wasn't the case. So if you followed the Braves, it was radio, especially their away games. It was all pretty much on radio. But if you know Van Miller, I mean, he's in my view, he's one of the greatest all-time broadcasters ever. I mean, he was a Bills broadcaster for 37 years. He was the Braves broadcaster for their entire existence of the franchise. And, he could make a boring game exciting.
So how was he as good at calling basketball as he was with the Bills in football?
He was, and he would tell you, because I got to know Van later, like kind of late in his life. He would tell you that he loved basketball the best. He loved those Braves years. He said they were by far the favorite thing he ever did.
And you had some other notes on Van Miller too, about the fridge for the players after the games. I thought that was kind of a good little tidbit as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was known for basically, I guess you'd say, stealing beers from the players, place. And then at the end of one season, they gave him a duffel bag full of beers, which was pretty good.
Wow. Did he have a color analyst, or was he calling the games by himself?
No, he was by himself.
Wow.
And what was really cool is he was like a cheerleader too. He sat right behind Jack Ramsey. So you can see Ramsey and him in the same photos, and he would be and Van would be standing up, basically cheering on the team. It was really funny.
Do you remember I'm a Detroit Pistons fan. Do you remember how many times Detroit came to Buffalo in the 70s? And George Blaha has been the Pistons announcer since 76. So I'm assuming he must have called a couple of games at the Buffalo Memorial Auditorium when he first started out.
Oh, I would definitely think so, because, they pretty much played a round robin schedule in those days. So they played every team at least once, home and away. And the Eastern teams, they played more often, the East and the Midwest. And it was, like the Lakers, they would only play a few times. But Detroit, I'm sure they played, a reasonable number of times. I mean, not like how many times they played, the Celtics or the Knicks or something like that, but still, more than once or twice a year, I would think.
And the Detroit Pistons, when they moved to Detroit in 58, they played at the old Olympia Arena where the Red Wings played, and then they played at Cobo Hall. They didn't really have their first arena until they got to the Palace, because after Cobo Hall, they moved to the Silver Dome, the big $70,000 seat Silver Dome, and then they didn't really get their first home until the Palace of Auburn Hills as well.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty amazing.
And the reason I became a Pistons fan was 1981. Isaiah Thomas was drafted out of Indiana and played for Bobby Knight.
There you go. That's all it takes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But to get back to the Braves, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Greg. What were some of the most memorable Buffalo Braves players and most memorable games in team history that you saw?
So, I would definitely say, by far, McAdoo is obviously the most memorable Braves player. He's a top 75 NBA player of all time. He redefined the position as a big man shooting from the outside, led the NBA in scoring 3 times with over 30 points a game. He was fantastic. Randy Smith would be considered the second best player in Braves history. He was a star soccer player at Buff State, and got drafted in the 7th round because of his speed. and he turned into a, terrific player. He was a NBA All-Star, actually MVP of the NBA All-Star game one year, and held the record for the longest time for the most consecutive games played. Ernie D was probably the most ballyhooed player to come to Buffalo when he came because, Providence had gone to the Final Four the year before. He was really an amazing player and a showman and fun to watch. And he had a great rookie season. And, again, is the history of the Braves different if he doesn't injure his knee in his second season? Because, he was never the same again. And, do the Braves go on and win an NBA championship and then, the team doesn't move, who knows? But, and then, there's other big name players that weren't here very long. Moses Malone. Most people don't know Moses Malone was in Buffalo. He played 2 whole games. And then he went to the management and said, you got to guarantee me 24 minutes a game. And Tate Slock wouldn't do that. So they traded him.
Wow. I didn't know that until I read your book. So that was very interesting that a Hall of Famer like Moses Malone was in Buffalo briefly.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, how do you trade him away? And then of course, we talked about Adrian Dantley. One of Dantley's teammates, John Shoemate, played here, was a very good player. Garfield Hurd. What we do in the book is we identify the top 12 players in Braves history and give you the full bio. And then for the 59 other players, we give brief bios, and then you'll have access to a website that'll have the full bios of those 59 players. Those, and then the games, I think they're all playoff games that, that kind of ring. Matt McAdoo scored 50 points in a game against the Washington Bullets, and they won, 108-102. There was a game game 4 against the Celtics. Jim McMillan tapped in the game-winning basket at the buzzer. Was another, huge, memorable game. Another game 4 2 years later against the Celtics. Randy Smith hit a 25-foot jumper with 3 seconds left to give them a 2-point lead. And then John Shoemate blocked Don Nelson's last second shot, and the Braves won by 2. But, the game that's most memorable in Braves history is Game 6 of the 1974 NBA playoffs. And the Braves make a comeback, tie the game. And this is Game 6. So if the Braves win, then they would play Game 7 in Boston. And JoJo White gets a rebound, shoots up a last-second shot. And McAdoo, quote, fouled him. They called a foul. They said there was no time left. Well, there was actually 2 seconds left on the clock. The foul was questionable. But Darryl Garrettson called the foul. JoJo White makes the 2 free throws. Darryl Garrettson said there's no time left. Paul Snyder goes down after the game screaming at the officials. If you look at the game clock, there were 2 seconds left. The Braves should have had a chance to tie or win the game. And of course they didn't. So they lose the series. Celtics go on and win the NBA championship. And 2 years later, almost a similar thing. We lose Game 6 in Buffalo on a questionable call by Darryl Garrettson, and the Celtics go on and win the NBA championship again. It's a star-crossed franchise. What can I tell you? But I enjoyed watching them play. They were fun. The book was, brought back a ton of memories, and Bud and I really have enjoyed writing it. And it's a part of Buffalo history that if you're, under 45 years old, you probably don't know it. You don't know much about it, if anything at all.
How much Buffalo Braves memorabilia is still out there? And when they did leave for San Diego, what happened to the court, the nets, and some of their equipment and any banners they had?
Yeah. Good questions. Yeah, there's definitely memorabilia out there. It's actually hard to find. Because again, this was a time before there was huge marketing, right? So there are a lot of things and you'll see in the book, we show all the media guides There's programs from all the games. They're relatively available in the market. But as far as like cups and mugs and glasses and like memorabilia, there's stuff out there with the Braves logo, but it's pretty hard to find because there's not thousands of them. There's probably hundreds of them that were made. Jerseys are quite difficult to come by. They'll be quite expensive, tens of thousands of dollars, most likely. They're and again, it's because a player might have been issued one or two jerseys a season, not like now where they issue a new one every game. So it's definitely out there, but it's it's not easy to, it's not necessarily easy to find.
All right, and we'll wrap this up just with two quick questions, Greg. This will be a short answer. Do you feel with the right ownership, corporate support, and possibly a new arena and marketing, the NBA could possibly return to Buffalo in the future, or even exhibition games?
No, I don't think Buffalo will ever have an NBA franchise again. I think the economics of the game have changed, so much. And I think the Sabres and the Bills are so embedded in the, and as I mentioned before, I don't think the city could afford a third major league franchise. I do think it would be very possible to bring in, like I mentioned, we talked about earlier, a few Toronto games this season. I think that would be really great and really cool. I think it would help the Toronto franchise get a lot more, Buffalo people interested in, the Toronto team. And I hope someday they do that. And I'm really surprised, that they haven't.
And I'm actually, the next time I talk to Eric Smith or somebody with the Raptors, I'm going to ask them that question, why they haven't tried to connect up with the Buffalo market, because they do. Obviously, Buffalo has a history with the NBA and basketball, and it's 10 minutes from the Peace Bridge as well.
Right. No, exactly. And, I would be, if they played in Buffalo, I would definitely go.
I would too. I would make the drive down to Buffalo to see a game at the KeyBank Center.
Yeah. No, it's kind of like, if you go back to the NBA again, back in the 80s, even with Larry Bird, the Celtics played 2 games in Hartford.
Yes, I remember those days. They played at the Hartford Civic Center where the Whalers played. Yes,
exactly. I saw Larry Bird play there one game. So
since I got you on here, what year and what game did Larry Bird and Magic Johnson play at the Buffalo Memorial Auditorium?
Oh, geez, I
got to research that.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because that I just would love to see if somebody has a ticket stub from those games.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure, right?
And also, Greg, what are some other fun facts about the Buffalo Braves that people might not be aware of?
Well, there's a couple of interesting stories that I'll leave you with, maybe that are in the book. So Nate Bowman played for the Braves after he came over from the Knicks. And we found a story. So he was Natalie Cole, the singer. He was her bodyguard. And the two were on the 26th floor at the Las Vegas Hilton during a fire that ultimately killed 8 people and injured 350 in 1981. Wow. And they're on the 26th floor and they think they're going to die. And Cole called for help, but no help was coming. And so they wrapped themselves in soaked bedding. And it was at that point that Bowman told Cole how much he had loved her. And in Cole's book, she recalls him saying, "Natalie, I love you. I've been in love with you since I started working for you. We ought to make love. And now, because it's the last chance we're going to get." And she answered, quote, "If we're going to die and it comes down to the choice of sex and getting high, I'd rather get high." She started smoking crack cocaine.
Wow.
And she said later in her book, she said, I knew at that moment I had hit rock bottom.
Wow.
And then there's another good story. I don't know if you remember Johnny Newman. He played for
That name
University
sounds familiar.
of Mississippi. He led the NCAA in scoring, averaged like 44 points one season. Well, he ends up with the Braves at one point, but this was when he was with the Indiana Pacers, and he was pretty much a bench player at that time, so he didn't play a lot. So Slick Leonard had not been playing him. Slick Leonard was the coach of the Pacers at the time. He had not been playing much. They're playing a game, middle of the second quarter. The coach yells, "Hey, Johnny, go in for Kevin Joyce." He jumped up, tore off his warm-ups, and ran down to the scorer's table. One slight problem. He had forgotten to put on his shorts, so he's standing at the scorer's table in his jersey and jockstrap. and the entire Pacers bench is cracking up.
Wow. Too bad they didn't have more TV coverage back then, because that would be put on YouTube.
Right, exactly, right.
And I think there was one.
The Braves had some really interesting players like Marvin Barnes and guys like that were personalities for sure.
And I think I read in your book too, they had one trip to Cleveland where they got stranded.
Yes. Well, yes. And then of course they had games in Buffalo during the blizzard where players ended up, sleeping at the Memorial Auditorium and stuff like that because they couldn't get home, and things like that for sure.
All right, Greg, we're going to wrap this up. Where can my audience purchase the Buffalo Braves book from A to Z, co-authored by yourself and Bud Bailey? And where can my audience follow you or find you on social media?
Yeah, so as far as the book goes, as I mentioned, it's just coming out as we speak. So it will be on Amazon. It's not there today, but it will be shortly. It's also available at St. Johann, which is JOHANN Press. So if you Google St. Johann Press and go to their website, you can purchase it there. It will also be in several, bookstores in Western New York. Bud and I are both on Facebook. You can also message me through Facebook, and I can get you a signed copy of the book. So, yep, those are, kind of all places.
That would be awesome. And I want to give a shout out to Bud Bailey as well, and yourself, Greg. I thought you guys did an outstanding job on this book, and I thought it was well written and well researched. And I also enjoyed the Buffalo Bills Illustrated History Timeline. Bud came on in July and talked about as well. That was a great job as well.
Thanks. I really appreciate it, Chris.
And I'm going to put you, no problem. I'm going to put you on the spot here before I let you go. Yes or no, is the Bills going to finally end that Buffalo sports curse and get that championship this year?
Probably not. But and hey, because you brought it up, I will. I don't know if you've seen that book of mine. So I have written a book called The Buffalo Sports Curse.
I haven't. I just saw it in your bio and stuff, but I'm gonna have to look at getting that book because I imagine there's some good reading in there.
The curse goes all the way back to 1901.
1901. Wow.
Yes, and it's affected every Buffalo professional franchise in the 4 major sports.
Okay, I will look for that book on Amazon because that's a book I would be curious about.
Yeah, it's a combination history book and curse.
All right. Well, Greg, hey, I want to say thank you so much for coming on here again today. I really appreciate it. Just give me a little bit of time and I'll send you an audio and video copy of our show, and I'll let you know when it airs on WQEE 99.1 FM in Metro Atlanta.
All right, Chris. Hey, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it.
You too. Thanks a lot, Greg, and we'll keep in touch. Have a good night.
All right, you too. Take care.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed Season 6, Episode 50 tonight with Greg Tranter, the co-author of the Buffalo Braves A to Z with Bud Bailey. And I highly recommend the book. I just read it, and I think it's a great book. And if you're a history guy, especially NBA history guy, it's fascinating to read about the Buffalo Braves and what could have been in Buffalo. And now they are technically the Boston Celtics and that as well. But again, I want to say thank you to Greg for coming on here today. And before we wrap up our show, guys, I did some work for the Toronto Argonauts this weekend, BMO Field media work for the team, and I interviewed Brian Scott, number 5, a quarterback from the Argonauts, and he is a native of California. So just stand by, and I will play my interview with Brian Scott after the Argos' 40-27 win over the Ottawa Red Blacks on this past Saturday night. Chris Palme here live at BMO Field in the Argos locker room after their impressive 40-27 win over Ottawa tonight. And I have a special guest with me, quarterback Brian Scott of the Toronto Argonauts. Congrats on the wins tonight. What was the difference between the first half and the second half against a hungry Ottawa team that came out tonight?
Yeah, absolutely credit. Absolutely credit to Ottawa. I think they came out ready to go. They had a good scheme, I think, offensively. But we just needed to stick together. And offense, I thought had a great night tonight. And defense got it rolling in the second half with a bunch of turnovers. And the D line really got after it. So, just a props to this team, man. We stick together no matter the circumstances. So, I'm just proud of this team.
In all the teams you've played with, Brian, in terms of depths and talents, where do you rank this 2023 Toronto Argonauts team?
Oh gosh, it's got to be up there. Like you said, just the talent from top to bottom. Every position group really is loaded. I've never seen a defense with so much talent in the front seven. We got Pickett and Wynn McManus. Those two are arguably the two best defensive players in the entire league. So, then you just, our receivers, offensive line, running backs, even with a guy like AJ Alouette, he's probably the best running back in the league. Where, Dan was able to step up and D Money too. So just, this is a great football team and I'm honored to be a part of it.
It's basically a next man up mentality on this team.
For sure. 100%. Whoever goes down, I think everybody's ready to step up and do their part.
Now, being from the States, how much of an adjustment was it coming over here and learning the Canadian game?
It's still an adjustment, I think. Every day I'm getting used to it. But yeah, with practice and scout team reps and stuff like that, I think just the more time I spend up here, I'll get used to it. Obviously, since camp alone, I feel so much more comfortable just seeing the rotation, learning the offense. We got a pretty complex offense, but Coach Miller and Coach Dimmy do a good job of teaching it.
And what are your thoughts on the organization, like Mike Pinball Clements and the entire coaching staff and some of the guys that helped you make your transition into a Canadian Football League quarterback?
Absolutely. Can't say enough about Pinball, obviously. When I was coming up here, I tell them the story all the time. It's just whenever I said I played for the Argonauts, I was always, Pinball. So obviously just being in the presence of a legend like that and just obviously the rich history here. Joe Theismann is one of the people that's my mentor. And, so when I decided to come up here, he couldn't say enough great things about the organization. So just obviously the rich history that the Argonauts have, with this team that we got going. It's an honor to be a part of it. I'm super grateful to be up here.
Last question. What are your thoughts on living in the city of Toronto and being here in Canada, in Ontario?
I can't say enough, honestly, with the CFL. I've just been pleasantly surprised every day. Obviously, living in the city of Toronto is one of the greatest cities in the world. We have a great fan base. It was sad to see, this is our last regular season game at home, but just the support that they showed all season long was special. And, just for being a rookie up here in the CFL and getting to experience all the stadiums, the away games, going in versus Winnipeg and seeing that crowd noise. And, it's been really cool. And I think over time, I've fallen in love with the CFL game up here. And I think as my career gets going and, I'll look back on this decision and just be super grateful that I made it.
What would you tell your American family and friends about the Canadian Football League and the talent level in this league?
It's deep. We have, like you said before, we have a really deep team, and I think the talent is underappreciated, especially by the Canadians. You know, when I came up here, I played for Team USA, and we got to play against Team Canada. So just being able to experience that a little bit, I think the amount of Canadian talent up here is good. And you know, just seeing the adjustment of the game and which type of players find success up here is it's interesting. So yeah, I can't speak enough about the type of talent that's up here in the CFL.
And a fun fact about you. What's a fun fact about you, Brian, and what Canadian food do you like here?
Got my favorite Canadian food. I tried poutine. I do like it. I do like it. And then a fun fact about me, gosh, it's a good question.
Hey, start singing a song to him, baby.
A fun fact is me and AJ Alouette sing Morgan Wallen at 6:30 in the morning every Monday through Thursday for lifting. So that's a fun fact.
All right, and the last question: what are your quick thoughts on the Saskatchewan Roughriders next week on the road? Just quickly.
Yeah, they're a great team. I think we'll be up for the challenge and just continue to get better at practice. And
Get him, B. Scott.
Yeah, just continue to get better at practice. And they're a good team. I think, they have a really good defense. They have a good front seven. I think Nick Marshall, the corner, does some really good things as well. So it's going to be a challenge. We're just going to, try to go 1-0 next week and keep that mentality throughout the season. And
where can my audience follow you on social media?
Instagram and Twitter, either one. I try to engage with you guys as much as I possibly can. So any questions for me, or I'm happy to, respond and whatever. So appreciate you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, and I appreciate it. Brian Scott of the Toronto Argonauts. Good luck the rest of the year.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, guys. That was Brian Scott, the quarterback of the Toronto Argonauts, courtesy of my YouTube channel. If you already haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, type in Chris Palme live with CDP Sports Talk. And the Toronto Argonauts, great organization and first class. And I want to say thanks to Chris Bilinovich this season for having me come down to a couple games to do some media work for the team, as well as being a season ticket holder. The Argos won that game 40-27. Now they're 14-2 for only the, I think, fourth time in their 150-year history. And they have 2 road games left this weekend at Saskatchewan, and then the following week at Ottawa, before the East Final is on Saturday, November 11th, 3 p.m. at BMO Field against the winner of the East semifinal between Montreal and Hamilton, which will be taking place on November 5th as well. Also, guys, the next live with CDP Sports Talk, next Tuesday, October 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern, with my special guest, Jim Taddy from TSN 1050 in Toronto. He is the pre- and post-game host for the Maple Leafs radio broadcast, and he's also the radio host for the Toronto Raptors on 1050, TSN 1050 in Toronto. So we're going to talk to Jim specifically about the 23-24 Toronto Maple Leafs, and with the additions of Will Reeves and Tyler Bertuzzi and Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and John Tavares and Morgan Riley. Can this team, last year they obviously got out of the first round for the first time in 19 years, but can this team get to the second round again, or possibly the conference final, or even get to the cup? So I hope you guys can tune in to season 6, episode 51, next Tuesday, October 24th, 2 p.m. with Jim Taddy from TSN 1050. And it's going to be talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. As always, guys, we're going to wrap up our show right here. And Live with CDP Sports Talk is a weekly sports and entertainment talk show hosted by yours truly, Chris Palme. As always, weeknights at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern on WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key, the home of Southern sports and talk, the heartbeat of Atlanta. The station's website is WQEEFM.radio12345.com as well. And make sure you turn in the Live with CDP Sports Talk tonight at 8 p.m. on WQEE 99.1 FM. Live with CDP Sports Talk is live streamed on these platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter /X, Twitch, LinkedIn. And I want to say thank you, everybody, for watching this show today on live stream as well. You can also follow me on my website, beacons.ai/Chris D. Palme. Live with CDP Sports Talk, again, is brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210, or you can email the dealership at info@barrycullen.com. Speaking of Barry Cullen Chevrolet, gear up for fall at Barry Cullen Chevrolet with a 2023 Silverado 1500 pickup truck, 0.99% financing for up to 60 months. Eligible Costco members can receive a $750 bonus on select trucks. More information about that at barrycullen.com as well. I'm also on TikTok if you guys wish to follow me there at Live with CDP. That's at Live with CDP on TikTok. A lot of my media work and my promos are all on there, and some game action from the Argonauts Red Blacks game this Saturday night as well on TikTok. At Live with CDP, again on TikTok. StreamYard is the official live stream provider of Live with CDP Sports Talk. If you're into webinars or podcasting such as myself, check out StreamYard.com as well. Live with CDP Sports Talk podcast, the audio version is available on these platforms: iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify for podcasters, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Castbox, LinkedIn, Pandora, and tuned in and weeknights at 8 on WQEE 99.1 FM. You can also email or text Live with CDP Sports Talk at cpalme19@gmail.com, or you can text the show at 519-820-7188 with questions, comments, and suggestions, and I'd love to hear your feedback as well. And before we wrap up this show, guys, we have a little bit of news coming from the National Football League, and me being an Eagles fan. Wide receiver, former All-Pro wide receiver Julio Jones, a 7-time Pro Bowl selection, has signed a 1-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles on Tuesday, which was today. Julio Jones, who's now 34, will be reunited with former Titans teammate A.J. Brown, who pushed for Tennessee to trade for him in 2021. The Eagles have some issues right now offensively, and Quaz Watkins is going to be put on the injured list. So they brought in Julio Jones for a 1-year contract, and I think with him and A.J. Brown reuniting and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, we got to get that offense going. The Eagles are coming off a tough, disappointing, I say lackluster effort against the Jets. They were up 14-3 in the game. They lost 20-14. Jalen Hurts had 3 interceptions, and the Eagles, I think, had 1 or 2 fumbles and too many mistakes. And credit to the New York Jets, who finally beat the Eagles for the first time in their history. Since the Eagles and Jets have been playing since 1973, they've only played 12 times in the regular season. The Eagles were 12-0, and now the Jets are now 1-12. And give them credit. Zach Wilson has beaten Josh Allen. He's beaten Jalen Hurts, and he's beaten Russell Wilson in Denver. So this New York Jets team is not the same old Jets team, and 3-3, and they have a very good defense. So disappointing loss for the Eagles, but hopefully the Philadelphia Eagles can rebound this Sunday night at home at Lincoln Financial Field against the 5-1 Dolphins and Tula and Tyreek Hill. That should be a great matchup between Miami 5-1, Philly 5-1. Maybe a possible Super Bowl preview, but that'll be on Sunday Night Football at 8:20 as well. We have some baseball tonight, National League Championship Series, Game 2, Arizona at Philadelphia tonight at 8:07. Phillies lead the series 1-0 after their 5-3 win last night. Former Detroit Tiger Nick Castellanos hit another home run, and right now, to me, if the Phillies go on to win the National League Championship, which I think they will, I think Nick Castellanos should be the MVP, and what can you say about the Philadelphia Phillies, managed by Rob Thompson from Sarnia, Ontario, former Tiger Nick Castellanos, and just a tremendous team. And former Tigers president and GM Dave Dombrowski, and The Phillies look to go up 2-0 tonight at Citizens Bank Park against Arizona. Again, first pitch is at 8:07. We'll see if the Phillies can go up 2-0 before games 3 and 4 go to Arizona as well. And finally, Thursday night football, we got Jacksonville at New Orleans at 8:15 p.m. And again, the Sunday night game this week is Miami at Philly at 8:20. And Monday night football coming up next week will be the 5-1 Niners against the 0-4 Vikings. And that's going to be a huge game for the Niners. They don't want to lose 2 games in a row. And the Vikings are still looking for their first win of the season. So that should be interesting. But again, I want to say thank you to my guest today, Greg Tranter, for coming on. He's an author of 5 books. He's a sports historian, curator, and him and Bud Bailey just recently wrote another book called the A to Z of the Buffalo Braves, a defunct NBA team that was in Buffalo from 1970 to 1978. So again, check out his book. And I'm going to put the website on my page before we in this show as well, because I think it's a great book. You can get his book when it's available on Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, Buffalo Home Braves. And it's on the website on Amazon.com.ca, and it is called the Buffalo Braves A to Z, and it was written by Bud Bailey and Greg Tranter, and it was a great job as well. So again, thank you to Greg for coming on. Thank you everybody for watching this live streamed and on my audio platforms, and to my audience on WQEE 99.1 FM. And again, Live with CDP Sports Talk is brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet dealership here in Guelph. I hope everybody has a great night. Enjoy the Major League Baseball playoffs and enjoy the NHL and the CFL and the NFL coming up this weekend. And we'll see you here next week for Live with CDP Sports Talk next Tuesday at 2 p.m. with Jim Taddy from TSN 1050 talking Toronto Maple Leafs hockey. Have a good night, everybody, and thanks again for watching and listening to Live with CDP Sports Talk.